Stunning and sad headline here in New York City tonight.
Her death was breaking news.
Very sad breaking news.
Fashion designer Kate Spade found dead in her Manhattan apartment.
The housekeeper is who found her.
It was quickly reported that she'd taken her own life, and in the hours that followed came many of the details of her private life.
That there was a note left behind at the scene.
Then Friday, word that CNN personality Anthony Bourdain had killed himself.
He took his own life at a hotel in France.
Journalists are taught to pursue stories that are in the public interest. Details about the lives and deaths of those in political power, for instance, whose personal decisions could affect public policy. But what about those who are simply well-known? And which details should be reported or held back?
And I know details at this point are scant, but what do we know, Steph?
Jennifer Michael Hecht has some thoughts on this. She has a PhD in science and society, and she's been a contributor to several major U.S. newspapers. Jennifer, you've been taking in the coverage this week. What do you think of it?
I think it's understandable, but dangerously irresponsible. We know that the way we report on celebrity suicides can have a big effect, and some of these things are manageable. If you just say that someone's died in the headline and put the fact of suicide and a few little details and not more in the body of the text, then not everyone is bombarded with the fact of the suicide, and that turns out to be a life or death issue.
We know, though, that people are interested, and unfortunately we see it on our own website, that's the story people are clicking on. Sure. They want to know the details. How do we manage that balance, then, between what people want and a sense that that's detail they shouldn't need?
We are going to have to be constantly discussing public health versus free speech. And I think the best news sources can distinguish themselves from everybody else by following some best practices in the short term. And just look up the CDC-approved journalism guidelines for reporting suicide. They're really not too stringent. They were followed pretty well after the death of Kurt Cobain, and the suicide rate did not spike the way it usually does. There's a little bit of an empathy issue that if you knew that someone you cared about could be hurt by certain words, it becomes sort of a no-brainer that you would just try to not saturate them with that. And so I think that if we extend our empathy a little wider, we get a little braver about what should be said and what seems like a reasonable step to take. It's just part of it is the myth that all suicide is the result of depression. It's just a lot of it is impulse, and a lot of it is somebody who's drunk too much and been humiliated within the last 3 months is more vulnerable than somebody who's been depressed a long time.
How do we find that balance, as you say, between don't put it in the headline because that could, lead to ideation, could cause someone to take their own life, and yet does that not add to the stigmatization of suicide if we bury the word?
Well, the thing is that we don't want to stigmatize it, but we do want to save lives. There really is a dose effect. I wouldn't have guessed it, but the social scientists have proved it over and over. There's a dose effect. So the more you hear about suicide, especially when it's someone like you, age, gender, race, profession, the more you are tipped into ideation. I think we have to feel for something for the people who are going to be tipped into ideation who never do it, too, because it's very painful. So if there's a dose effect, we can make it so that the person at least has to go looking for certain vivid images.
Interesting to get your perspective on this. Thank you.
Thanks so much.